Yes, so maybe we can start with the yes? No? Yes?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, we're on. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Diane Proctor. I'm the chair of the Town Government Committee here in Concord for the League of Voters and sit on the board. And it's just so wonderful to see everybody here this afternoon. It's a good time to be here because for those of you who do any kind of peeking out your door, reading a newspaper, listening to anything online, you realize that truth is in jeopardy right now. That what is true, and we all probably in this room might agree is true. There are others who look at us as if we're quite crazy and say, oh, no, that's not true. And the people who have been in the absolute forefront of reminding our country that we live by a rule of law and that we have a constitution, that Constitution is important, is the ACLU. And so we have an enormous privilege in having Massachusetts executive director, and our disabilities doing Carol Rose. And you know, I was thinking yesterday actually, when I was talking about Carol in a meeting, I was thinking that you know, some people are, very few of us are kind of famous in our own time. I mean, Nancy Pelosi, Barbara Jordan, one of my great favorites in this world. But then there's Carol Rose. I mean, she really is. She is a remarkable woman. Her birth, her optimism, her vitality, her clarity of mind, her clarity of judgment are really a solace for all of us, and a way that we can count on. You know, count on having an ally in the right places at the right time. So I turn this over, squeeze your little things when you're feeling tense, and I welcome Carol Rose.
Thank you, Diana. I'm so kind and so thank you and to the board for inviting me to be here today. And to all members of the Concord Carlisle League and to the Concord Free Public Library, I love libraries and librarians for hosting this. It really is an honor to be here, and happy Constitution Day. This is officially Constitution Day. My colleague Bianca Sedgwick is over here. She brought these. I asked her to go grab some from the office room. So if you can grab one on your way out, if you don't, let me know and we'll get you one. But if you're stressed out about the Constitution, this is really useful. Be stressed out. It's absolutely nice. Yeah, so. You know, I have to say what I would say is my famous in my own time, which is not true. I did co-clerk with Ketanji Brown Jackson. And so I told my kids, I said, you know, hey, your mom's co-clerk with Ketanji Brown Jackson. Did? I said, yeah. I said, what happened to you? As Shakespeare said, how sharper than a serpent's tongue the words of a child. So you know, this is fall in Concord, Carlisle. You know, it's the leaves are turning. It's this beautiful time of year, and we always think of associate, you know, the season of the falling leaves. But I always associate it with democracy and Constitution Day, because we have preliminaries and primaries and debates and door knocking, and you know, the trees are shedding their leaves, and we can stop the ballot box. Or maybe they just try to alert us that it's time to get our mail-in ballots submitted. So that's what we care about. And like many of you, I'm sure you all have been thinking a lot about democracy. And the one thing I want to say to you is that winter may be coming, but democracy is not dead. Okay? And it's not even a dead letter. You know, I say a lot. People who know me know I like to talk about the fact that democracy is a muscle. And like any muscle, you have to use it in order to make it be strong. And you know, the one thing about the League and the ACLU, you know, we were founded in the same year. We've been sister organizations all these years. We worked together all these years through 18 presidencies and offices and chapters in all 50 states. We've been through a lot. And the thing about the League and the ACLU is like, we like to flex. Like, we like to flex, and we need to flex to safeguard democracy right now. So, speak about voting rights, which is one of the many things that we work on. We work on immigrant rights and equality under the law, racial justice, and gender justice, all the range, and privacy and technology and free speech and all these things. And I hope we have some time to answer questions about a range of things, but I thought I'd focus today about voting rights. Because in so many ways, voting rights is a modal right. It undergirds all the other rights, right? Because we need to be able to have a free and fair vote so that we can make sure that our democracy survives. And they are under attack. But we have been together, the League of Women Voters and the ACLU, both in Massachusetts and nationwide, have really been on the forefront of working together as part of the same movement to defend our democracy and voting rights. So let me give you a few just highlights of what's happening in the voting rights area. So first, in the courts. We filed a joint lawsuit with the League in April and secured a preliminary injunction blocking President Trump's executive order that was going to require documentary proof of citizenship in every federal voter registration. And this decision by the Supreme Court, one of the few that we're waiting, is really securing that fundamental right to vote in the organizations like the League that help people to register. And so this still is holding, the case is ongoing, these take years and years to work their way through. And everybody says, you know, the President Trump knows how to use time and litigation to get his way. Well, guess what? So does you. These are all part of the tactics, right? So, you know how to play it. A lot of our focus is on the U.S. Constitution and also the state constitutions. So even when the federal Constitution isn't as being interpreted by the courts to be as protected as we wish, our state constitutions. And you know, it was the U.S. Constitution was signed 238 years ago today. But the Massachusetts Constitution, the oldest written constitution, is now 240 years old. And it is the basis for the federal Constitution. And people always say, why do you think Massachusetts has so much more freedom than a lot of other states? And I think it's a couple things. One is we have this great constitution, and the other is that we have town government instead of city or county government. We have counties with their own sheriffs, well, they are sheriffs. But mostly we're town government, and I think that closeness, that proximity, is one of the reasons we have so much freedom in Massachusetts. And of course, Concord and Carlisle is like the home of that kind of thing. So just last week, we filed a lawsuit in Missouri to challenge their effort to try to drive a congressional map in 2026 midterm elections in violation of the state constitution. And then in Louisiana, we had a big victory. This is the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals, so that's the highest. So you have in the federal courts, you have your district court and your appeals court and the Supreme Court. So this was in the 5th Circuit, which is generally pretty hostile to civil rights and civil liberties. But we won, basically saying that a new legislative map that they created violated the Voting Rights Act once again. And the court agreed that the maps were diluting the voting power of Black Louisianans unfairly by dividing communities and districts with the goal of reducing that group's power. And that's a violation of equal protection under the law. So those are 3 pretty big victories that we've had in the last month alone. And so, what I want to say is that when we fight, we win. And so it's really important that we keep fighting and not just to read the headlines. Because a lot, especially in these other places like Mississippi and Louisiana and Alabama, we don't always hear about it up here in Massachusetts. And I don't want us to think that we aren't winning some across the country. With an ACLU office and a league office in every state, it's really important that we're fighting these fights. Another case that we just filed was down in Louisiana. And then finally, there's a case coming up in the Supreme Court. I'm going to skip forward to that. On behalf of the ACLU, on behalf of the League of Women Voters. So I love this. It's the amicus brief, a friend of the court brief. Basically, it's kind of interesting because it would basically say that in Illinois, this congressman has filed a suit saying that he has standing to challenge proposed changes to some of the voting rights laws. And how does he get standing? Like, you have to prove that you're impacted. In other words, I can't go to court, or you can't go to court. Well, I don't like this law. You have to somehow show that you're impacted by it. And so what he argues he's impacted by it because it's going to take resources away from his election campaign. And so the ACLU came in on behalf of the League of Women Voters and said, yeah, but also places like the ACLU and the League of Women Voters also have standing, because when we have to fight these bad election laws, it takes away our resources. And so even though we're not big fans of the guy who's the plaintiff in the case, we're big fans of the concept that if the court's going to rule and say that he has standing, elected officials have standing to challenge these laws, voting rights laws, so does the League of Women Voters. So that's like, I know some of this is, I'm going to get less technical in a minute, but you know, these technical maneuvers that are happening, it really requires great lawyers. And for those of you who heard me on the radio today, there's a great cartoon I saw in the New Yorker by a cartoonist named Carrie Bliss, and it said, two guys walking down the street, and one guy says, what do you call 100 lawyers suing the government? And the other guy says, a good start. Let me tell you, it's true. And our lawyers are just so good and so on fire right now. I'm so proud of our team and across the whole country, the ACLU team. They really are. They were made for this. The lawyers who go to law school and go to work to defend the Constitution, when they have this moment, they're just on fire. So it's scary, but also really fun to watch them. And so there's a lot of things that we're doing that are good. And I guess what I want to say is the persistence is really, really important. Because we don't win. We just had a loss today, an ACLU case on behalf of the League of Women Voters down in South Carolina. And I just heard about it on the way over. So the court ruled that only the state legislature could fix gerrymandering. But the problem is the state legislature did the gerrymandering. So that's called an absence of checks and balances. And what the court ruled was it's a political question. Right? So the court refused to reach the issue and just said, oh, we can't do anything, it's a political question that belongs with the state legislature. So that's a big setback. And you know, the line, when we fight, we win, you know, that comes from actually from a Boston social justice organization, City Life, Vida Urbana, which used it, they did anti-war stuff in the 60s, they did workers' rights stuff. But the notion of when we fight, we win doesn't mean that every time we fight, we win. What it means is when we fight, the we gets stronger. The we, the muscle of democracy, gets stronger, we flex. The movement building with the ACLU and City Lights and League of Women Voters and La Collaborativa and all these other groups, when we work together, when we fight together, win or lose, we get stronger. And democracy gets stronger. So the real meaning when we fight, we win, isn't that we win every time we fight. It means that the fight itself builds our democracy and makes us stronger. So I just offer that, because in these times of sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, it's so important to keep in mind that we're working over a long period of time, right? I just want to say that, because other times it becomes too discouraging. If we think, you know, the irony is when I was young, I thought it was like 2-year terms. Now that I'm old, I'm like 20 years. You know? So there's kind of a paradox, right? In that. But I do think that we need to be thinking long term. And I am old enough now to have seen how the law and changes in the law affect us over a long period of time. I'm just going to stop on that point and just say something. A couple of examples of this. One of my colleagues, a woman named Sarah Wunsch, she's recently passed away, but she's an amazing lawyer. And in 2011, she won the first in the nation lawsuit on the right to record the police in the performance of their duties. Okay, 2011. You know, since then, we had the George Floyd murder that was caught on camera and led to the whole Black Lives Matter movement. We had our client, Rebecca Oscar, when she was kidnapped by ICE, the tough student that you probably saw that video, because you saw that video. That was incredibly powerful. Not just evidence in the courts, but evidence in the court of public opinion. Right? And you think about these important moments, these important cases, and then I'm thinking back to Sarah Wunsch winning the right to report the police back in 2011. Right? So sort of keeping in mind how the law works. It's not just a victory or like a light switch, right? We're building a body of law, a body of policy over time, a policy of practice, a movement that over time I do believe we will overcome. But we have to know that, and we know that from the civil rights movement, it's never a straight line. Right? There's always setbacks along the way. History books always talk about the victories, But we know that there are setbacks along the way. So I just want to say that as a part of the way to make sure that we're, keeping hope and blessing. So I would say not just because, despite the setbacks, I would say because of some of these setbacks, like the one that we had today in South Carolina. And we understand that it's important to continue to flex, and to strengthen democracy, and not to let it weaken or atrophy. Our opponents are relentless, we know that, and they're only growing bolder. But here's the thing, we're relentless too. We're from Massachusetts. We're relentless, and we will fight for freedom and democracy. And we have to have that same relentless attitude that they seem to have. And the interesting thing is when we do that, they back down. They back down. I mean, he's not going into Chicago with his troops, right? He decided to go to Memphis, right? Because the governor or the mayor in Chicago said, no, we'll fight you. Bullies back down. We know that. Bullies back down. And I guess the other thing I want to say is I want to warn us, despite our great Constitution and our great government forms we have here in New England, and especially in Massachusetts, that I want to guard against the exceptionalism. That somehow we're immune. It can't happen here. We need to fight. We especially need to fight. Like when I meet next week, I'm going to meet up with all my other executive directors from 50 states. I hang with the people from Mississippi and Alabama and Louisiana. They are on the barricades. But they say to me, please keep fighting. Like, we need you to win. We need you to lead the way because it's just so hard right now. Right? So the victories that we get here are not just important for Massachusetts, they're important across the country. And so the courts are one place that we fight, but like the league, there's the courts, and then there's the legislatures, both the federal, the state, and local legislatures. And then there's the court of public opinion, all, with field and marching and all these things that are happening. And so let me tell you a little bit about what's going on. We're part with the league of the Election Modernization Coalition. Is anybody over the coalition? Yeah, so you know them, they're great. And we've had a lot of victories recently. So we passed the Votes Act of 2022, which was a federal, which strengthened early voting and mail-in voting. No, that was actually Massachusetts. And it's really important to have mail-in voting. I mean, Trump's trying to get rid of that for a reason, because he wants to make it harder for people to vote. Anything that makes it harder for people to vote is anti-democratic. That's the only test you really need. Like, hear about a policy, does it make it harder for people to vote? I'm against it. Right, so that's one. And the Votes Act was huge. It said, love my legislature, but it's hard to get stuff done. But we managed to, and to get it signed into law. We're leading, again, the league and the ACLU together to push to guarantee hybrid access for open meetings across the state. We managed to get an emergency COVID thing put in that said you can have hybrid meetings, and then we said, why not keep it permanent? So for people for whom it's hard to go out, or especially in the winter, where it's hard to find parking, or all those things, why don't we have open meetings permanently? Right? That's good for democracy, so we're pushing for that. Just a few days ago, we had a big hearing that all the voting rights groups, including the League and the ACLU, showed up, and the things that we're pushing for right now include same-day voter registration. Nobody should be turned away from the polls because the registration has expired. Right? You should be able to do a provisional ballot and have it checked, again, giving people more chances to vote. We also want to decouple voter registration from the municipal census, right? So people who move also have a chance to vote, because again, who are the people who move? It's going to be young people and people with less stable lives who have to get new jobs or things like that. So you want to make sure that people, we don't decouple voter registration when somebody changes addresses. And I have, like, my 3 kids are in their 20s and they move like every year. To a new address, a new group home, just saying. Not a group home, but I mean a house. Well, they kind of are like group homes, actually. And the other thing is we want to make sure we have regular audits of polling stations to make sure that they're accessible under the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Massachusetts law, legal analog to that. So again, looking for new ways to make sure people can vote and pushing. It's not enough to fight the bad stuff, you have to push for the good stuff. Right? Because that creates a body of law, a body of practice that is important here in Massachusetts, but again, provides a model that is important in other states as well. So these are all really vital reforms, and we have a lot of work left to do if we're going to rebuild trust and faith in our democratic systems. There are a lot of people across the country, and here in Massachusetts, who just feel alienated by their elected officials right now. And I want to say it's particularly true in communities of color and communities where there's more poverty. So we can pass a lot of election reforms, but if people don't actually get out and vote, it doesn't really change anything. So I'm trying to think, how many years ago was it? 3, 4 years ago? That we started a new program at the ACLU Massachusetts, which has become a model for other affiliates. It's voter education and targeting particularly communities of color. So we're in Brockton, Springfield, Pittsfield, Worcester, and Lawrence. Okay, and what we do is we hire people from the community to work as canvassers, to go door to door, and they have thousands and thousands of conversations. And the biggest conversation is, why don't you vote? Right, and the answer, more often than not, is doesn't make any difference. Right, and one of the most beautiful stories that came out of this was down in Brockton. And by the way, we're talking about municipal elections. We're not just doing like presidential elections, we're talking about local elections. And we were down in Brockton, and that was what we were hearing down in Brockton. What's the point? My vote doesn't count. For the first time ever, a member of the Haitian community was elected to the school board by 3 votes. You think your vote doesn't matter? It does. And it's a huge difference. And we've been able now to go and to stay in Brockton. We don't just go and leave, we stay. And we talk to people, and then we find out what their needs are. We help them develop voter questionnaires and to host voter candidate forums. Right, and this is part of what we've done. We did it with What a Difference a DA Makes. We did the same thing. We had voter questions, and we had Know Your Sheriff was another one. I do have to say, I love the difference a day makes. A friend of mine said, "Oh, I have a theme song for What a Difference a DA Makes." I said, "What's that?" She goes, "Doris Day. What a difference a day makes." But it was pretty funny. But we hadn't had on that DA, the public education campaign, we hadn't had a new DA who wasn't an incumbent elected since 1988. There had never been a contested election. And we went out there, and I think there are 11 different district attorney areas, counties. And we had, what was it, 5 of them had contested elections for the first time, just because we had forums and candidate forums and did door knocking and talked to people. We don't care how you vote, we just want you to vote, right? So this is the kind of grassroots stuff that really makes a difference. That campaign that Mike talked to the ballot box, that's in its 3rd year. The other DA and sheriff campaigns, voter education campaigns are ongoing. So they get elected every 6 years, so we bring them back every 6 years. And we're just really proud of the campaign. And I wanted to make sure you all knew about it. Because it's the kind of thing that I think the League and the ACLU can continue to do and work together and make it even better and even bigger. And we know that we can't do it alone. We have to form movements. We have to work in coalition. I'm just so pleased that the League and the ACLU have built this partnership over the last 105 years. And the same is true for the whole voting rights movement here in Massachusetts. There's a really vibrant movement of that, and the League plays a huge role in that. So I'm really proud to embrace the League. I think this is an all hands on deck for history and for democracy moment. And the only thing that's going to keep us afloat and our democracy afloat is ensuring that we have these free and fair elections. So despite all the challenges, and despite the great harm that's already being done, I know that the ACLU and the League of Women Voters are not going away. We're not going to Canada. And we will never stop fighting, and I know you won't either. So thank you, and keep flexing.
Wow. Questions. We have 40 minutes for questions. I'm going to use take the privilege as moderator to ask you a question. So, we watched what happened in Texas in terms of gerrymandering, right? I want 5 more seats, and actually, apparently that may happen. And so California said, well, we can do the same thing. We can react. And the California League, out of principle and out of thoughtfulness, said, well, maybe not. Because gerrymandering of any kind is not admirable. how would you, if this were a California group, right, Carol, how would you address this? And don't worry about disagreeing with California League. I mean, how would you address this and what would you say?
Okay, so there's a really old joke about the ACLU, which may be true for the leagues. And it says, if you agree with the ACLU 80% of the time, you're probably an ACLU member. If you agree with the ACLU 50% of the time, you're no doubt a board member. Yeah, so I'm sure that the ACLU, like the league, would say, we shouldn't do gerrymandering. It's wrong, and we're a principled organization. We put principles for popularity. That is a righteous organizational position. I'm taking off my ACLU hat. Go Gavin Newsom. There are some things that we, as private citizens, can support and do. And, I've never been somebody, even when I was a journalist, I said, I'm going to vote. I'm going to give up my franchise because I'm a reporter. In fact, if I don't know my political stance, how on earth can I possibly pretend that I'm going to be fair? Right? So I think some things aren't for our organizations to do, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be done. And so that's my feeling.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to move around and we'll start with Concord.
Thank you very much for that, because the situation in Texas is very different from what's happening in California. He's taking it to a ballot, and the people are going to decide. And to me, that is a distinction.
That's a huge distinction.
And it's temporary. So just wanted to mention that.
Right.
Now I have a question for you.
Yes. No, that's great information, and I love it. Thank you.
The shadow docket.
Yeah. I know they're trying to fix it by not calling it. They went from the shadow docket. This is the Alito Roberts Gorsuch. They went from the shadow docket to the emergency docket to now the interim docket. I mean, whatever you call it, it is undemocratic. Okay? And they have had now more. These are cases that are taken not on the merits. They're in between when the session, the last end of June is when the Supreme Court goes on recess, and then they come back the first Monday in October. And in between, that's when an emergency, they were supposed to be for death penalty cases. That's what it was created for. And this court has had more cases just this summer than Obama and George Bush combined. Right? And they're not briefed. There's no oral argument. So there's no reason to open public. I mean, think about the importance of an open court, right? You can go and read the briefs or file amicus briefs and read the reasoning of the justices. But in this, they're just issuing decisions, often unsigned, by anybody. It's just shameful. And, the one thing I would say is that, most of the decisions are stays. So let me just tell as an example, both the federal district court judge and then the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in California said that stopping people at ICE or other federal agents who stop people in LA in ICE roundups based on their race or where they work or their accents, that's a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment and the 14th Amendment under both search and seizure and also racial profiling. It's just clear. And the lower court said you have to stop. And what the Supreme Court did isn't to rule on the merits, but rather to say we're going to just pause the lower court stay and say, well, you can do it in the meantime. You can do it in the meantime. Now, that's just shameful. So here's a little bit of lens to help us get through the night. One is it was Gorsuch's vote of concurrence. Nobody joined his concurrence. Okay, so when people, it's getting a lot of attention, but nobody joined it. Even the people who voted for the stay of the Supreme Court didn't join it. So that's at least a modicum of vote. And the other is that it only applies to LA. All right. So if you hear about, I know many of you are involved in protests and things like that. If you hear about situations where that kind of profiling is going on, call the ACLU, because we're looking for cases like that where we can challenge it, because we don't think that should stand. And we think it's important to challenge it on the merits. It's just such a clear violation of the Constitution, a lot like the birthright citizenship case. So anyway, yes, the shadow docket is undemocratic and really alarming. And I think the main thing to keep in mind is they're not reaching and ruling on the merits yet, so these cases are still working their way through the lower courts. But by the time you say, can you take away the grant funding for the cancer research, or can you, deport somebody, or can you fire somebody and have them lose their job? And you go, well, you can do it in the meantime. That's horrifying. It's terrible.
And I'm getting ready to find someone to sue the Supreme Court. Okay, Janet.
Well, I jotted enough notes down to have 3 questions on the Supreme Court. So
Right.
maybe I'll
Ask them all, and then we'll take it from there.
that wasn't loud enough? I jotted enough notes to have about 3 questions on the Supreme Court. So maybe I'll just say it all and you can
Say them all.
come up with it.
Yeah.
First of all, the Supreme Court is a mess. I don't like it anymore. I used to have respect when I was a little kid, but now I don't. So I was wondering what you would do to fix it, what you think is realistic. Increase the number of justices, have term limits or whatever. Next question is relationship of the federal circuit judges versus the Supreme Court, because they seem to be getting a little nudgy and saying, what the heck are you doing to all our rulings? And the third thing is, I guess a specific example of that is that we learned about injunctions. Like now, if you want to string together a class action suit, that takes time. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, those are all great questions. I love that you're paying attention. I read recently this thing that said, if you're feeling anxious and distressed about the state of the world, good. They haven't got to you, enough to you yet. 3 questions. All right, so first, let's start with the birthright citizenship, which is the shadow docket ruling that said that you can't bring nationwide injunctions anymore. And they've been wanting to go after nationwide injunctions for a really long time. But they chose this. It's so bizarre because, honestly, birthright citizenship on its face it's in the Constitution. It's not hard. But by saying that you can't have a nationwide ruling from a lower court, they're sort of trying to pee on the lower court judges. No, they are. It's just gross. And I don't usually use such vulgar images, but it is gross. And just saying. And so what we did in that case, just so you know, the ACLU of Massachusetts, so there were a bunch of different cases. We knew this was coming. And so we went in immediately, and about 2 hours later, we filed a class action. And we were ready to go up and do that. So again, the lawyers are watching this, we see it coming, we get ready, we go in. And that's going to work on something like birthright citizenship, where you can so in a class action, you have to show there's commonality, numerosity, and various things. So the people are sort of similarly situated. And so they ruled, we got a class action on behalf of the yet-to-be-born children, but not their parents. So it's a clunky tool, because you get sort of some relief, but not total relief. I think the more promising thing to watch is the Administrative Procedures Act, because under the Administrative Procedures Act, the government can't be arbitrary and capricious. One thing we know about this administration is they are arbitrary and capricious. And when you win an injunction under the APA, you get a nationwide injunction. So and they may come after that, they probably will. But right now, we're using the combination of the class action and the APA to continue to try to get this kind of thing. The second question was about the higher courts and the lower courts and how, so Gorsuch, so this was an ACLU Massachusetts case. So because the First Circuit Court of Appeals is our region, which includes parts of New England and Puerto Rico, Vermont is down in the Second Circuit for I don't know why. But anyway, we're in the First Circuit Court of Appeals. And we don't have any Trump judges. So everybody's coming from all over filing lawsuits in Massachusetts. Well, we have a dozen, lawsuits against Trump EOs just here in Massachusetts. So that my lawyers are just going nuts. Anyway, so this was the case on the NIH. So we sued on behalf of researchers and doctors and healthcare providers, saying that you cut our grant funding and that was arbitrary and capricious, right? And they're doing it because of DEI. But it's just silly. It's just, and so Judge Young, who's the trial court judge, was a Reagan appointee. This guy's hardly around, right? And he said, I've never seen anything in all my years of practice. This is the most racist thing I've ever seen. And he actually wrote that in an opinion. It was nuts. And then he was upheld by the First Circuit. And And then the Supreme Court, in their shadow document, not only did they put an injunction that stay in the meantime, the grant's gonna be cut, kind of thing, but then they said, how dare Judge Young rule against us because we ruled something else in a California case about grants in the shadow docket. And the shadow docket's not supposed to have any precedential value. And how do I know this? Because Chief Justice Roberts was on the other side in the case and said, this has no precedential value. And so they take Judge Young to task, to the woodshed, when in fact the Supreme Court Chief Justice said the same thing in the case itself. So it was nutty. And by the way, I gotta tell you, for those of you who are like, oh, I've been reading these stories about how Judge Young went and apologized. We were in the courtroom, he was being sarcastic. And it just didn't work. You were tough in the courtroom. He was being sarcastic, and now it's been reported as that he made this big apology. He was like, well, I guess I'm very sorry. It was one of those harsh things. No, it didn't work. So just for you to hear that, you can say to yourself, okay, he was being sarcastic. But then Allison Burroughs, another wonderful judge here in Massachusetts, a federal judge, put a footnote in a recent case saying, stop attacking us. What do you think you're doing? This is crazy. And this is like the court eating itself. And I think the Supreme Court is trying to assert and say, we are the only deciders. And that's just not true. That's not how the law works, and it never has. And so I think we need to continue to call it out, continue to name it, continue to talk about it, continue to clarify and push back. As Diane's in this like post-truth moment. So we have to continue to tell people, our neighbors, our friends, in movement, in community, what is it that we're doing here to fight back? And a lot of it is hanging on to what actually happens. And as to your first question, I'm going in reverse order, about what would I do to fix the court, I've thought about, I sort of think term limits are probably the best way. The notion that there's more of them, I'm not sure it's going to make it better. But I do think that there's a good reason to think about it. I'm not sure that's the ACLU's position, because I think we believe in pure democracy, one of those principal things, but I think that term limits would actually be super helpful. Because I do think it would take some of the politics out of it a little bit, because people would have an automatic time when they leave. Make it be fairly old so they don't go back into private practice and then have a conflict of interest. Right?
So Carol, as Bush said, who's the decider? I mean, who would be able to decide that term limits could happen? What is the process that might have that happen?
Right. I don't know whether it would be enough to have a statute. It might be enough to have a congressional statute, or whether you'd have to go to a constitutional amendment. I don't know. And maybe somebody else here does, but I don't want to say something when I don't know the right answer. The other thing I just want to say, and I'm being a pain to a lot of legal academics right now. Project 2025, I just read this article that said, we're coming out with a new book that's going to be how you must interpret the Constitution according to originalism. And it's going to become the new primer for everybody who wants to be a judge. Right? And so I wrote to all my friends who are constitutional professors, going, hey, when's your book coming out? I'm so excited. It's the pro-democracy version of this. And the actually wrote back and said, oh gosh, I hadn't seen that. Oh my God, Lord. So we need to start thinking about what we do want. I'm happy to play defense. I'm on the barricades. I'm at a point in my life and in my career where I'm happy to do that. But we need to use that to create the space for an offensive strategy. Defense is fine, but the national line didn't hold, right? We have to have an offensive strategy. What is the Constitution that we want? What is the role that we want? And I'm so excited when I talk to, a lot of the young people coming up through law schools. We have so many interns and legal fellows, all these people, and I'm like, what do we want to build? Should we be interpreting the Equal Protection Amendment to say that you have a right to housing or health care? Can we reinterpret? Do we need a new Constitution? And I know there's a lot of fear about, because of the power balance right now, I get it. But I think, so I used to be a reporter, and I'll never forget the very first story. I'm very proud. It was 1985 that I had, this in the New York Times, about this new group called the Federalist Society. 1985. Okay, let's get going. I know we have the Constitution Society, that's the alternative. But whether it's that, or the League, or the ACLU, or probably some combination of all of us, let's start talking and finding spaces to talk about what do we want the Constitution to say? How should it be interpreted? Right? Because we have that same Constitution, but it changes over time depending on how we interpret it together. And if the people who want to build an authoritarian regime or restore a king and take away women's rights to vote, they're actually talking about that, and take away equal protection under the law. Let's say, no, this is what we want. And I really do think that this is sort of the last gasp. But if we don't fight back and have a positive vision, it's gonna be permanent. So I'm very dedicated to fighting that. Okay, here and then Nancy too. I'm gonna jump in the back.
Okay.
And I'll be shorter in my answers.
Okay, sorry. David, this is going to David after. Thank you.
As you talk about possible alternatives, the name Danielle Allen comes to my mind.
Can
anybody hear what it's
As you talk about possible alternatives, the name Danielle Allen comes to mind.
Yeah.
I have no doubt many in this room are familiar. She has certainly got a lot of stuff going there. Can I turn to freedom of speech, where the ACLU obviously has got the leadership record. I remember, I'm old enough, when they defended it, KKK, I believe.
Yeah, that's a Nazi.
Yeah. And of course, it's front and center right now. To be simple, I am just outraged as I have watched what has gone down. Kurt's whole message was freedom of speech. It was how he conducted himself. And now we find on the right, particularly the extreme right, but hell, most of them, saying, if you speak up, we're coming after you.
Right.
Well, that's hate speech in itself.
Exactly.
When Pam Bondi going to prosecute some of these people on the right who are doing this sort of thing, I could give her 15 examples, right? 10 minutes. Especially Trump, when asked by an ABC reporter about it, his response was to say, I think we'll come after you.
Right.
Because your heart's filled with hate.
Right.
That was a hate speech. True. Were they coming after the president? I'm very curious what your thoughts are on where we go. Kind of obviously we need freedom of speech. It's a complicated question, but my goodness, is it front and center.
It is front and center. Thank you so much for saying that. And they're weaponizing it, right? They're calling for free speech when they want it, but not for anybody else. Free speech for me, but not for thee, is what we're really hearing from this administration, and it's shameful. And the Pam Bondi, what she said, what J.D. Vance said, what Trump said on this stuff, it's just shameful. And it doesn't honor anybody's history. And it's so undemocratic, every other time we've had this kind of stuff happen, whenever we've had political violence, our leaders have come together and said, we as a people, as a unity, must turn against political violence. And they're saying, no, we'll silence you if you say that. And it's really, really scary. And I do want to say that there have been reports here in Massachusetts of some public teachers and firefighters and other people who have been fired, and we're looking at those cases. It's complicated law, I have to tell you. It's not just an open and shut case on this, because there's a balancing test. I think lawyers in the room will know the dreaded balancing test. There's a balancing test as to whether or not it's disruptive to a teaching environment or learning environment. Remember the Tinker case is another one. There's Pinkerton, and then there's the Tinker case. Mary Beth Tinker, or the lifelong man, was it disruptive to the school environment or not? So in some environments, like school institutions particularly, there's more of a balancing test, and they become very, very fact intensive. But none of that has anything to do with the fact that the principle has to be, if you don't permit dissent and free speech, what are the alternatives for people who are angry at the government, right? And then you channel them into violence. And so it's so important as a matter of public safety, as well as a matter of constitutional law, that we promote free speech. So we are definitely taking those challenges on. And the other thing I wanted to say, anybody who's in the law firms or in the universities, they need to stand together. They need to stand together. If all the universities had said no, and I'm glad Harvard is saying no. We hope they continue to. But, I wish Columbia had stood with them. Wouldn't that have been great, right? And so we need to make sure that our university leaders stand together. And I just want to say, they're just people like you and me. Right? They need to hear from us. And a thank you can sometimes be even more powerful than a Maddie, right? Let them know when they do the right thing that you support them. Same thing with the law firms. I'm so proud of Wilmer Hale, used to be Hale and Dorr, having a sense of decency after all, Mr. McCarthy. Hale and Dorr was great. If you get a chance, it's nerdy, but it's a great read. Go read the Hale and Dorr briefs on the Trump EO trying to shut down the law firms. It was a thing of beauty. But same with Perkins Coie and Jennifer Black. Some of the other firms did the right thing. I wish all of them had, right? And so that's why unity, there's strength and safety in numbers. We need to stand together. We need to build coalitions. We can't have any internecine warfare between the various groups that care about democracy. We have to work together and stand together and speak together and say not on our watch. And by the way, while I'm at it, October 18th is going to be another big No Kings gathering across the country in small towns and big cities, wherever you are. If you can get to one of these, it really matters. I can't tell you how many times elected officials say to me, how come nobody's marching? I'm like, they are! Just yesterday, every Wednesday, over at the ICE detention center in Burlington, Massachusetts, there are like 200-300 people that show up. I think the churches are organizing them. 700. I mean, it's fabulous, and it works. I mean, there were 2 different cases yesterday that were going on. One was a woman who was going in for her they call you in. It's easier than going after actual people who are undocumented. They find people who have proper paperwork. They bring them in, they strip the paperwork, and then arrest them. Right? It's gross. So she was set free, and then the young man from Milford who was picked up, they let him go free, but then they called his parents in. And because there were 700 people there, his parents went home. So, we have these opportunities. Showing up actually really matters. Again, it's why Trump decided not to go to Chicago and go down to Memphis instead. Because when you stand up to a bully, they often back down. And judges are people just like you and me. We had a couple questions.
I'll come to this. There's some back here too. So, okay, right. We had 2,000 people, Carol, in Concord Center.
Yay.
For the first No Kings.
Birthplace of democracy.
Okay, what can we do about ICE? Should we try nibbling around the edges, like trying to have them not wear masks, or everyone takes photos? What's the core approach?
So a core approach, one is show up. Again, they're just people. But also make sure that whatever city or town or state or commonwealth you live in, that you let your elected officials know that they're not required to collaborate with ICE. Okay? We don't have to share information with them, right? Just call it data hygiene. If you don't like the word sanctuary, say, let's have a data hygiene policy. No, I mean it. It's like the librarians, when the Guantanamo stuff was going on, and they were going into all the libraries, and the librarians were heroes, because they started a new policy. Every night they would wipe the computer clean. So when the subpoena shows up, you go, oh, we don't have it. We don't have anything. So we need to do data hygiene. We need to stop collaborating. I mean, we need to make sure that we're not sending information to other states that violate people's rights. And this is true not just for immigrants, but also for people seeking reproductive health care or gender-affirming care, right? They come to Massachusetts. We have a bill right now in the legislature called the Location Shield Act. It may be folded into a larger data privacy bill, but it would basically say that the government can't track you based on your cell phone. It's like when you drive somewhere with your cell phone, your location's being tracked, even when you turn it off. Okay, so when somebody comes here, let's say from Texas, and there's a bounty hunter who can get $10,000 or now $100,000 for turning somebody in. Well, when they come to Massachusetts, there can be a geofence around Massachusetts where your cell phone location can't get tracked. So a lot of these things that we can do are around non-collaboration and particularly around information sharing and data hygiene. As to the masks, I think we should continue to call them out. I mean, I don't think we'll win in the courts suing about it, but we should continue to say, if you're not doing anything wrong, you shouldn't have to hide your face, right? But what they want to do is to make it so the protesters can't hide their face, but the agents can hide their face. And that's a signature of an authoritarian regime. So I think we have to call it out. But I think the more meaningful thing, you cannot interfere. If you're at one of these ICE things, pull out your camera. Remember Sarah 1, your right to record, but not to interfere. okay? So recording is important, but if you interfere, you will be arrested. And so unless you're ready to be arrested, I would suggest you don't interfere. And we don't want people to interfere. What we want people to do is to document, to shame, and to call it out. And then we have something we're just starting called the Habeas Strike Force. So when people get picked up, the ACLU, again, in conjunction with other groups, we are working with the Immigration Bar or the Criminal Defense Bar to get people actually habeas petitions to set them free really quickly before they get sent off to, Louisiana or other places. I do also have to tell you guys, it was just in the paper out of Hanscom Air Force Base. They're now sending a flight every night.
Yeah, we've been working pretty hard on that here in Concord. Please go ahead, yes.
No, and so you guys, I don't know if there's gonna be a legal claim that we're looking at whether there are legal ways to stop it. But certainly protests.
Yeah, Terry Ackerman and Marshall, you want to address this?
Thanks. Yes, I'm on the Hanscom Field Advisory. I'm on the Hanscom Field Advisory.
Thank you, great to meet you.
We had a meeting about this last night.
Good.
We had 80 people on Zoom, more than I've ever seen. Yeah,
Great.
a lot of local groups came out.
That's wonderful.
And I have a question for you about last night's meeting.
Yeah.
A woman from, a human rights lawyer from Hampshire is working on this at Pease Air Force Base.
Mm-hmm.
And they're working on the anti-commandeering amendment or something like that from
Right.
the 10th Amendment. And they want to hook up with attorneys in Massachusetts. Are you guys working on that?
We're happy to talk to them about it. Yes.
Okay, so
Okay.
I'll get your contact.
You can get my contact. You can also, I'll just tell everybody, it's C Rose, first initial Carol, C Rose at aclum.org. So send me a note. But yeah, we're definitely looking at it, trying to figure out a variety of ways to reach out. Thank you.
Now, there was a question over here, and and I see Pamela,
And then Nancy.
whoa. Oh, Jen, and now I'm back down.
Sorry, just to kind of do the back and then move forward.
Okay, perfect.
Just to build on the Hanscom. So what more can we do? Can the town, can we make good trouble through Massport? Can we get Massport to say, you have to identify who the airlines are who are flying out of Hanscom, or Hanscom has to identify, like, where's the power
All
there?
of the above. Like, it's never happened. Like, we've never been, it's unprecedented. So ask them. Like, ask Massport. Put pressure on Massport to ask. Right? Yeah. I mean, part of it is like, again, these are just like ordinary folks, and their first thing is like, yeah, there's nothing we can do. And then you go, really? Because I have 80 people standing here with me, and they want to know what you can do. All of a sudden, they take it more seriously.
And do we have any ability to make them show us who's on the manifest list?
I would say yes.
Flying out.
I would say yes. I would say yes. I mean, it's public record, right? And the other thing is, it's kind of interesting, the so-called alligator Alcatraz case down there, like that was shut down an environmental lawsuit. So we also need to like think outside the box. Like there are other ways, is there a noise problem or environmental problem or, all sort of a public records lawsuit. Anything that we can do. You think about the saboteurs who took their sabots, their wooden shoes and threw them, to gum up the works. So a lot of what we have to do is, delay, disrupt, a lot of this, and it makes a difference. Time is on our, we need to move as quick as we can, but if we can slow down some of these really bad things, that saves lives. So, I mean, I wish I had like a simple answer, but anyway, but I'd love to hear more about I've heard about the anti-commandeering stuff, and I'd love to talk to some of these.
There's some people really working on it, and the Stock Private Jet expansion team here in Concord has been working very hard on just the general environmental horror of what Massport is trying. Massport has not been particularly responsive to concerns, but I guess we're going to just
keep it up. Keep at it. Keep at it.
Since according to a lot of scholars, constitutional scholars, Trump was in violation of the insurrection laws, the 14th Amendment.
Right.
And it doesn't require him to be found guilty in court of that, although he was in California.
Right.
I mean, in Colorado.
Right.
And it does have a clause of how you can remove that condition so that he could legally take office, which was not done.
Right.
So that Trump's presidency is illegal unless we have some way of saying that, well, the Constitution doesn't apply once you're inaugurated. But if we don't apply the Constitution on the merits, then there is nothing to stop, well, the already takeover, because why are we worrying about other clauses of the Constitution, like the Voting Rights Act or any of these, when we aren't enforcing that one?
Well, I mean, we lost on it. We didn't try.
But we didn't lose on the merits, we lost on
procedural.
so we should have told Congress to try and remove the bar.
Right. I agree with you, and I think we should, and I think that's something we should campaign on.
The other question is.
Sure. Oh, okay, go ahead.
Sorry. The other question is, if we protect our voting rights, that doesn't help if the election is rigged.
Right.
And how do we guarantee, we need like the John Lewis Voting Rights Act,
Right.
the things that need to be passed so that we have to actually protect our elections from being stolen.
I agree with you. Look, what do we do? So obviously, election monitors, that's the ACLU and the league, and others, we send people out as election monitors. But and we support the voting right, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. But right now we don't have power, right? So what are the things that we can do when we don't have power? And so, and find the power. That's exactly right. So that's where marching and showing up. It does matter. I know people think, what's the point? There is a lot of point because we begin to turn the tide. Look, I'm as in despair as anybody else. I live this stuff day in and day out. But hope is a political act. And if we say, well, there's no point, they've got the power, there's nothing we can do. That may be true. But in the meantime, I'm gonna fight. I agree with you. Better ways to do it. I agree with you. And I'm going to a strategy meeting with all the ACLU leadership, next week, and we're gonna talk about what can we do? And can we think outside the box? It may come to the point where there's gonna be things like civil disobedience, not violence, but peaceful civil disobedience. There may have to be more radical turns, but I'm not done yet. I think the courts still are helping. I just listed all the voting rights cases that we have won, right, in places like Louisiana. And so if we can just get people mobilized to then exercise their right to vote, I do think that there's hope. I mean, after the midterms, I don't know. If that doesn't go well, that's going to tell us a lot about what our strategy is ahead.
Is it possible for you to force the Supreme Court to rule on the merits?
No, not really. No. I mean, we can't make them take a case. We can't make them take a case.
But with the injunctions, you can. Keep doing the injunctions and they have to take it.
If we can. No, it's a great question. It's a great point. I mean, I think right now the place to sort of think about is with the secretaries of state. They're now asking all the secretaries of state to turn over the voter rolls. I don't know if you've heard about that. It's terrifying. And, put in a call to Secretary Galvin and let him know. Well, I hear what you're saying. A lot of the things that he's doing are illegal. And we are fighting every time we can, but we have to be able to position it in a way that the court will take it up. It's not enough to have it's just wrong. We have to have a case and controversy to be able to do it. And we lost in Colorado, and we lost in Maine, right? Where my friend and former colleague, Shenabello, tried to keep him off the ballot up there for the same reason. And the courts rejected it.
But off the ballot is not the same as the democracy.
Right. I hear what you're saying. Let me be clear.
No, wait, let me ask you a question.
Thank you. I share your frustration. Yes.
This is gonna hurt because I am 84 years old and I cannot follow you because you're talking so fast.
Sorry. I apologize.
Can you, I don't know, sometime can you slow down?
You got it. Please. Thank you.
So I have a question about the ice location in Burlington. So when we stand there, we're limited to standing on the sidewalk.
Right.
Why is that? I mean, how come we can't, like, we're far away from the building? I thought, don't we have access to government facilities at some level?
Right, not all government facilities, so you do a public sidewalk, and you can't block traffic, so there could be time, place, and manner restrictions. But I don't know the specifics, and it's very, very fact intensive. So I would love to hear a little bit more about it. And maybe there would be some ways to challenge it. So the legal standard is you have the right to be seen and heard by your intended audience. Right, so I don't know if you all remember the Democratic Convention when it was here. It was right after 9/11, it was 2004. They built the protest pen. Remember, they were going to put all the protesters in a pen. So we sued about that. And then we wanted to have a march that went close to it, and we sued about that. And so there are ways to do it if it's unreasonable restriction. But it's hard, particularly in a place that is a security or public safety, what they would argue is a public safety place. They'll have more power to restrict our movements. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And I'd love to hear more about it, so shoot me up. And we had observers, we sent protest watch observers into a lot of these places. And so we had somebody down there yesterday to make sure that people's rights weren't being violated, the protesters' rights. And that's the other thing. If you find or hear about anybody who's like not allowed to take photographs, or a journalist, we just have a couple of cases now, one in Georgia and one in Los Angeles, about people who are reporters who were arrested for reporting on things, or any police misconduct. Those are the kinds of cases that we're looking to bring. So if any of that happens, call the ACN. We're interested.
Is there another question? I don't want to be, okay. Carol, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
It's an honor to be here. Good questions. Thank you. So it is so clear, just then before we leave, just a couple of quick comments, if that's okay. Okay, what I wanted to say is two things. One, support ACLU. Send money, send everything to make sure they can go do their good work. Join the league if you aren't a member of the league. And tomorrow night, back to back, we have a program here in the library against hate, which is a response to the ADL lawsuit against the schools. This is not an opportunity to come and talk about schools. That's what school committees do. It's an opportunity to come and talk among ourselves as citizens about how we can support ourselves among our community and with each other. And this should be a pretty remarkable evening. So I urge you to come back tomorrow. That's 5:30 to 7:30. And I want to thank you for being here today. It means the world to see you here. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.